Welcome to a new episode of Mind Your Mind, the podcast dedicated to all frontline workers around the world. My name is Roxana Parra Sepulveda. I am your host, and today I'm very, very grateful of being with Vanessa Bear. She is psychotherapist and counselor, ecotherapist, yoga therapist, mountain leader, forest school practitioner, and safe trauma recovery. This is a workbook that Eunice wrote with co-author with Babette Rothschild, the Wild and Well-being card deck. So I will be asking you to tell me everything about this, because I'm sure this is a lot of super useful material for all our audience. But first of all, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to have this conversation because just for general information, one of the big intersection point for me in somewhere in my career was to read the books of Babette Rothschild. And in one of these books, there is a phrase that I always use in my presentations and everywhere, and I always keep in my mind, is that something in the line of desperate clients cannot be supported by desperate practitioners or therapists and so on. And here I am in this journey, having this conversation with you, Nes, about well-being. And today we will be focusing as well in nature and how do we use that magnificent resource to support our well-being.
Yeah, great.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about this book, the 8 keys to safe trauma recovery, and the Wild and Well-being cards that you have developed?
Yeah, so the 8 keys to safe trauma recovery workbook is something that Babette and I wrote together. It's a follow-up to her original 8 keys to safe trauma recovery book. So that was a book, something that really actually supported me in the past. When I completed Babette's training, I applied to be an assistant on her training courses, and then ever since then I've been assisting on her training. So we've worked a lot together, and then we created the workbook that supports the 8 keys to safe trauma recovery original book. So the workbook is mostly filled, it's just filled with lots and lots of different kind of practical things to do to work through and recover from trauma. And nothing in there is anything that's kind of designed to be triggering or anything, I guess, that we call phase 2. So like processing trauma memories or anything like that. It's all about feeling more safe, feeling more stable, having a better quality of life.
That's fantastic. So he's touching on that phase 1, no, that is about emotional regulation and finding that space of safety, which is pretty much what we also aim to do here, to support people to get to that connection with safety, that connection with that inner sensation of, that sensation of everything is okay, and that they can step from there and develop their personally meaningful self-care strategies so they can reach that point every time that our frontline workers are exposed as well to witness the suffering of others. And what about your Wild and Well-being cards?
So the Wild and Wellbeing card deck is, again, I'm really keen on kind of activities and exercises. So again, this is 70 exercises in a card deck form. So it's I find it quite handy because you can just take out a card and like put it in your bag or in your purse, and you've got a kind of resource with you that's kind of easy to access. So I find them really useful and handy in a card deck form. They are exercises, again, all phase 1 kind of exercises around feeling more stable. And with these, they really focus on developing a greater sense of connection, like embodied, and also with more than human nature. So really feeling part of the world.
So be feeling part of a greater, there's something bigger than you, not just to stay that external connection. So let's go to the core of all of these. How do you define wild and well-being?
Well, I was thinking about this, and I think, well, for me, the knowing that I am nature is really sort of integral to this, I think, because I think there's a real feeling. I mean, I came across an article recently that said something like nature versus man. And I thought, oh, that's
Mm.
interesting because
Mm.
man is nature. So I think this real, there's a real sense of disconnection from ourselves with the kind of more than human world. And I think, it's only been for relatively a short amount of time that humans have spent all of this time indoors, that all of this time kind of sitting still, all of this time being quite static and removed from the rest of nature. And at the same time, we have all these increasing health problems and stress problems. And it just feels like, and this real increased sense of loneliness. And I just think, maybe there's some sort of correlation with that. And a lot of the research shows that there is, with regards to kind of our benefits of nature. And I mean, for me personally, connecting with more than human nature has been like imperative for me in my own well-being. So in the 8 Keys to Safe Trauma Recovery workbook, I speak about having had PTSD. And the three sort of biggest things that helped my recovery were relationships, so good enough relationship with other humans, and more than human animals as well. Movement, so feeling strong, particularly on my bicycle, to be honest, and being in sort of really kind of developing some practices where I connect with more than human nature. And I also think that even with the bicycle, if I'd been kind of cycling on a bike indoors, I feel like I might have had some of the kind of feeling of strength and reconnecting with that kind of muscle and connection with my own body. But I don't think it would have had anywhere near the kind of impact that it did when I was as cycling out into the Peak District and whizzing down hills and hearing bird song. And so I think that all of those things were really integral to my recovery and my feeling kind of safe and stable and connected and a sense of belonging in the world and being able to sort of retrust the world again. My nature practices within that time really include lots of things about just simple awareness of sort of more than human. So, for example, I started a sip spots practice, which I've had now for about 25 years. So I'm quite old.
Can you tell us what that practice is about?
Yeah, so in the book I call it a mindful wild daily ritual, but basically it's kind of just having. I think it's useful if it's the same spot every day. So I use a same spot every day. Obviously, it's changed over the years as I've moved around, and if I'm on holiday, um, where I just sit. Now, it could be that I've only got 5 minutes, so it's just 5 minutes. It might be that I can be a bit more spacious and be there for half an hour. But I go to a space every day. Sometimes I experiment with different times because kind of sometimes it's quite nice being there in the moonlight and sometimes in the sunrise and at different times. But just being really, just being there, using my kind of extraceptive awareness, so all of my senses to really be there, really be present. So watching little ants crawl around, noticing that a flower that was a bud yesterday has kind of opened, really noticing the intricacies of tree bark, like really being there, really being present and really noticing the beauty of the world. And I think that's something that was so important for me because noticing all of this beauty, all of this, and also all of the like death as well, and the kind of
Yes.
The dying and the and all of that, and that I am part of all of that was just such an incredible support for me. Yeah.
Yeah, what I love from what you say is something about this sense of trust that we can develop in the world again, no?
Yeah.
And that when we are exposed to trauma personally or witnessing the trauma of others, I've always thought about that as realizing the dark side of humanity, no, of the dark side of humanity. I was working for many years with abuse, and so how human beings can create so much hurt in other human beings, no? And I found that very dark, and that sense of trust in others, in human, and in the human nature and nature in the world as a safe space is, I think, also the core of getting to a point where we can be more relaxed and get that space to contemplate that you're suggesting, that I find fabulous. You just make me think about my mornings, and I didn't realize that I'm actually doing the same, because I look at my garden, and yes, and noticing, all the changes through the seasons, and you get through that cycle as well of life and death in nature, and it's such a simple action, but it goes very deeply into who we are, no? What are we part of? Greater, bigger.
And it gives us so much, it gives us so much permission as well. Like you were talking about, like the cycles, and things decay and things come, and it's like, oh yeah, we're not supposed to be like blooming all the time.
All the time.
We're allowed to be sometimes decaying. We're allowed to be sometimes just about growing. We're allowed to be, we've grown in the wrong place and we're not doing so well. We're allowed to kind of be part of that rhythm of nature. We're allowed to be seasonal beings. We're allowed to be open, and we're allowed to be closed.
Absolutely. And we can also pay attention in that way to how we change in probably our needs, for sure, change with the seasons as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Do you think there are sort of kind of common challenges that, because I'm thinking about all frontline workers in different roles, right? But that they are exposed and witnessing the suffering of others. So I'm thinking about, have you identified kind of common challenges in different roles, and in relation to being, connecting with that element of well-being?
Yeah, so burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, all of these things are so prevalent, especially with frontline workers, and especially when they're overworked, there's so many hours, and not lots of time to take kind of breaks and support services available. I think it's so difficult, isn't it? And I guess that we were talking last time you and I spoke, when we were sort of thinking about doing this interview, and we were saying that it includes so many people. It's obviously all the frontline workers, but it's also everybody involved as well. It's the admin staff and cleaners, and everybody that's kind of involved in this, in caring for people who've had traumatic and difficult experiences, can completely be affected by what's happening, and helping to kind of build resources for yourself so that you're able to stay more stable, to be able to distinguish what's yours and what's theirs, and also to be able to find good enough contact and support so that you can feel held, as well, so that there's a kind of constellation of support, really.
Yes, and I think from what you're saying, that comes to mind as well in terms of challenges is this idea that different roles will have different challenges, but somehow we can see the constant of compassion fatigue, of eventually sometimes burnout, that progressive movement towards burnout sometimes, not that can be prevented. And that's why we are here and having these conversations.
Absolutely.
No, that, and I guess is a hopeful, although we are identifying the challenges, is also a hopeful message that this can be prevented, and that very possibly, depending on the role that you are, you will be exposed to different things, and you will have the nature of your role also will have different challenges. But I'm wondering as well, if you think, is there, and what comes to mind for me, that the idea is that different people will have different challenges. So it is something that is related probably to the nature of the role, but also to our individual experience, no? Our own personal reaction to what we experience every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Really being reminded of something that has happened to us as well, or that kind of triggers us. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think there are any myths or misconceptions about wild and wellness that we should dispel here?
I guess when you said that, I was thinking about, in fairy stories, how we have this kind of perception of woodlands being these scary kind of places. I think for me, there's lots of like stories where the outdoors can be like a scary place.
Huh.
Um, that's what came up when you
Yeah.
said that. But I think it's also really important to kind of also be aware that there are groups of people who feel like more unsafe in nature. And it might be because they've experienced a natural disaster or something specifically connected with like the natural environment, but also, there's lots of people that like I've read articles and different things with people that they say they've experienced like a higher rates of racism and sexism and just like discrimination in kind of national parks and different things like that. So there's loads of different groups that have been set up in order to support people from different sort of backgrounds and different things.
I mean, what I'm hearing from what you're saying is that sometimes through the storytelling that we hear in childhood as well, we may experience nature as a dangerous place,
Yeah,
potentially.
exactly. Yeah. So the stories that we hear, like Little Red Riding Hood and like Hansel and Gretel and different tales like that can sometimes be like paint the sort of other than human world as this kind of dangerous and dark and mysterious place. And in some ways that's kind of exciting and wonderful. And in some ways it maybe incites a little bit of terror into going into those woodland places. And I think so I used to work as a forest school teacher,
Mhm.
and some of the children, really took that on. It's like, oh, will there be wolves and who will live here? And there's a part of it that's kind of excitement, and there's a part that's yeah, like fear. Like, is this a place that we're supposed to be?
And that for some people as well, you mentioned earlier that for some people, there is to go out in nature is not a safe thing to happen. No, it's not a safe thing to do.
Yeah, so I think, I talk about all of this kind of belonging and acceptance in nature and this really feeling of kind of being held. Um, but research shows that only 1% of BAME people access national parks. There's loads of research that shows that women feel afraid of being out walking in the hills on their own, that people have experienced kind of oppression in rural places. So there's lots of different groups that have started in order to create a more of a sense of inclusivity and safer space in the outdoors. And some of the ones that I know about are things like Climb Out Fest, which is to kind of overcome homophobia in climbing community, Peaks of Colour, which is in the Peak District,
Mm-hmm.
Black Girls Hike, Muslim hikers, and a group called Everybody Outdoors, which is for larger or like plus sized people who also feel a sense of like they're not supposed to be outdoors and not
Yeah.
supposed to be hiking and climbing. So there are lots of groups that people can get involved with so that they do feel a greater sense of kind of belonging in those areas as well.
Yeah, so it's about belonging as well. So amazingly important, and how much there is this parallel, no, with between nature and how we experience the world as well. That is not always a safe place, and it's interesting because we don't want to be. I thank you for this answer as well, because sometimes it's all about being connected, being all wonderful and precious, and not everybody can experience that. Not everybody have really that sense of connection, and I think there is an element of shame, a big element of shame sometimes in trying, no, in wanting to, in sometimes testing something, trying some activity, and actually feeling completely the opposite, not feeling what we are talking about, the trust, the sense of belonging, safety, and regulated and somehow calmer at all. And so what happens there? And I think here as well is that element of bearing in mind that we can have the support from these groups that you have mentioned. Thank you for mentioning them as well, or a professional, or a book like the one that we have been talking, the 8 Keys to Safe Trauma Recovery as well, all the cards that will give us ideas, because this is all about trial and error, right?
Yeah, everything's an experiment, and it's, and I think it's really important to kind of hold that. It's an experiment. Is this useful for me? Is it not useful for me? Everything is useful for somebody, but nothing is useful for everybody. And really kind of holding that. In the 8 Keys to Safe Trauma Recovery workbook, we talk about Goldilocks. Like, Goldilocks is a real hero of mine. I think she's fantastic. Do you know the story of Goldilocks and the three bears?
No. Tell
So
us.
there's a little girl, and she finds this house in the woods, and she goes inside. And first of all, she finds some porridge on the table, and and there's 3 bowls, and she tastes the first one. She's like, oh, it's too hot. She tastes the second one, and she says, oh, it's too cold. She tastes the third one, and she says, oh, it's just right. And she eats the whole bowl. And then she thinks, oh, I'm quite tired. So she goes upstairs and she tries the first bed. Oh, it's too hard. She tries the second bed. Oh, it's too soft. She tries the third bed. It's just right. Anyway, and it goes on, the story where she falls asleep, and then the 3 bears who own the house come home. And she's a bit shocked. But the bit that I really love is the bit where she experiments, she tries things. This isn't right for me. She tries something else. This isn't right for me. She tries something else. She finds something that's useful. And, I think that's really, really important, that it's because a bit like you were saying, like sometimes it can be, we try something, we give ourselves a hard time for it not being the right thing for us. And yet that's really normal. It's really normal that there is no one size fits all. It's just
Yes.
whatever fits you, and that can change. What fits you today might not suit you tomorrow. And so it's really kind of all exciting experiments, I think, to see what suits you right now in this moment.
Absolutely, that's wonderful. Are there any scientific studies, anything that help us to understand from a more theoretical point of view that there is a connection between nature and how we can assist our well-being by using nature?
Well, there's been loads and loads and loads of research about the connection, about kind of how we benefit from being in nature and spending time in nature. So there's research that shows that spending time in nature can lower stress levels, decrease blood pressure, reduce the risk of asthma, allergies, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, can increase life expectancy. I mean, it sounds like a magical cure, doesn't it? I mean,
Yes.
sort of saying these things, it's like fantastic, and really boosting loads and loads of research around mental health and being in nature, and how wonderful it is. And lots of doctors all around the world have started to prescribe spending time in nature as a way to improve their patients' health as well. So, it's really, there's loads and loads of sort of medically sound research into this as well. Yeah, there was one study that said that people who spend at least 120 minutes in nature a week are significantly more likely to report good health and higher psychological well-being. And that doesn't have to be like 2 hours all at once. It can be 15, it can be your lunch break, or 15 minutes after work, where you kind of maybe do the practice like I described, or just kind of sit for a minute and watch the birds. Yeah, anything like that. It doesn't have to be movement, it can be kind of sitting. And they found that it didn't have to be, it wasn't like associated with any particular age group or anything like that. It was everybody. Everybody.
You make me think about my weekend. I just went to Dorset, and it's
Oh,
an amazing place that I love. I go back to it all the time. And
yeah.
I found myself having big sides, walking
Mm,
around inside, big side.
yeah.
Like something was I was releasing something, and at the same time intaking something, and just being touching the grass, touching the sand,
Mm,
the feel of the water,
yeah.
because it was rain, sun, everything at once in one day. All those changes as well just create different smells and so on. So I'm thinking about, it made me think about my senses and how we
Mm,
can trust as well. Part of that trust that we are talking about is
yeah.
about trusting our senses, and how that can help us and support us in connecting with nature.
Yeah, and I think, we talk a little bit about it in the workbook about the importance of kind of extraceptors, so our senses, because in when we've experienced a traumatic sort of experience, something that can happen is that, when we get a flashback or we get a reminder of something that's traumatic or difficult, we often feel sensations in our bodies. So we might feel like a tight chest, or we might feel like a racing heartbeat. And something that happens with people who haven't been traumatized, so people who haven't been traumatized, they take information from their external environment, so through their senses, and they work out whether they're safe or whether they're in danger based on what they see, hear, think, feel, smell, all of those things. Whereas people who have experienced trauma can instead judge whether or not they're safe or in danger based on their internal experience. But their internal experience is based on remembering a traumatic memory. So they might have seen a trigger or something that has reminded them of something that happened in the past. And so they feel like they're in danger now. Whereas actually, if it's possible to use your extraceptors, so to really look around, to smell, to use your ears, to all of these different things in order to really assess for danger in the external environment you're currently in, and hold that and say, oh, well, okay, right now, as I'm looking around this room here, I can see and I can smell and I can feel that I'm safe here. And at the same time, so this is kind of dual awareness. And at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, I notice that in my body, I feel, oh, my heart's beating faster, my breath's got a little bit faster. I must be remembering some danger from the past. And at the same time, I can feel that. And at the same time, I can see now and hear now and smell now that I'm safe. So yeah, really developing those that sensory awareness and that sensory nervous system is so important.
Fabulous, and such important thing. And you make me think about in a specific conversation I had last week with someone, and this notion of dual awareness, in which also is to realize that you are responding to a memory,
Yeah,
not to something that is actually happening here now in the present, where you are in the
yes,
room, for example, that you are in, or and so on. And that happen naturally, without us having any control on that. But
yeah,
what we can do then is to pause and bring that sense of awareness, that is a more conscious decision
yeah.
to bring that element of
And
awareness.
can help us assess as well. We say we can see the safety, but we could also be able to see danger.
Yes.
Because while we're really focused on our internal awareness, we might miss, external. It might be that we look around and we see, oh, actually, I'm going to walk into a tree here. So it might be that we miss real dangers that
Mm-hmm.
because we're so focused on our internal experience. Yeah.
Yes. So lot to learn in the practice there of that dual awareness that you're telling us about today. And what advice will you give to someone looking to incorporate more nature into their sort of wellness routine?
Well, I think taking the Goldilocks approach is always important. So really kind of noticing what's right for you. And it might be things, and I guess thinking about things that you already enjoy, maybe. So it might
Mm.
be kind of sitting, it might be that you have a sit spot every morning watching the birds at your bird feeders while you drink a nice cup of tea. It could be that one of the exercises in the card deck that I really like is called Befriend a Tree, which is quite nice. There might be like a tree that you walk past every day on the way to work, and it might be just noticing that tree. It might be just taking like, a few seconds as you walk past it to kind of notice the roughness of its bark, or to notice the different swirls on it, to notice the way its branches move, to notice the different leaves and the colors and notice how they change. Things like that. So small things can be kind of incorporated quite easily into your day, where it doesn't, because I think people don't have a lot of time, and it feels like, oh,
Yes.
now I'm supposed to do all this self-care stuff at the same time as being run off my feet with all this other stuff.
Yes.
I think
And
some,
becomes like a chore, like something, yeah, and that is what feeds as well, the negative talk, the
yeah,
shame and the blaming. Oh, I'm not good
yeah,
at that. I don't
yeah.
have time. I hear all of that all the time.
Absolutely. So I think just something where, oh, well, I always have a cup of coffee in the morning. It's like, okay, well, I wonder what it would be like to have your cup of coffee looking out the window at the bird feeders, or looking out the window at the tree that you really like, or maybe even sitting in the garden and having the sun on your face. Or, I guess it's sort of incorporating what you're already doing with some of these things of connection, so that especially at the start, so it feels like you're kind of experimenting, um, in a way that doesn't then stress you out. That it's like, oh, now I've got to make half an hour for this thing. Yeah, set yourself up for it to be useful. Yeah, rather than
And
more.
is and something, yes, and something that is incorporated in your life.
Yeah,
It's like it becomes part of it,
yeah,
not an extra chore that you need to do or something.
exactly.
Yeah. Is there a first step to be fully connected with nature?
Well, I think one big step is about kind of the acceptance that we are nature, but I don't
Uh-huh.
I don't know that that doesn't come from other practices. You know, this feeling that we are animals, I think sometimes feels like a wild thing to say. Like, I think it's almost like, oh, but weren't we kind of made by robots? um rather than, of course we are part of nature. So I think that's a significant maybe step. I don't know whether that comes early or whether that comes later, but it feels significant to me. I think maybe, and I think that's the connection, really. The connection is something about we are nature, and within that becomes a reciprocal thing. So we've spoken about how nature can benefit us, all these different wonderful things. I mean, it sounds like a magic pill. If only, wow, fantastic. And at the same time, we're on a planet that's having real problems at the moment. So there's something about how do we become reciprocal within that, so that we give back to nature at the same time. And I think within that, we create a deeper connection, whereby, and it might be just something as simple as putting seeds out for the birds. It might be something like creating a little bug hotel in your back garden or on your balcony. Um, but it can be simple things, and something in that reciprocal nature, I think, and developing that reciprocal relationship forms real deep connection, I think.
Yeah, lovely. And I love to hear the birds in the background while you're talking as well. It's such a beautiful company for today's episode because we are talking about that deep connection, no? And
Mm.
I feel that this conversation also is touching upon the profound element and more probably spiritual side or existential side
Yeah.
of who we are, what is the place that we have in the world and how much we can do to connect and have this sense of belonging that is so easy to lose when we are so immersed in pain sometimes, or bad memories or hard work, this constant sort of stretching yourself over and over every single day, doing wonderful things, but at the same time generating a detrimental impact on yourself. And so how we can find that giving but also receiving and having that balance there, that is a tricky balance. And that's why I'm doing this podcast, because it is a tricky balance. And I know that every single episode have some specific tip or some bit of information that can be useful to this journey that is so, so personal. I just want to give you a massive thank you, Ness, for being here with me today. I really appreciate this conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us to end the episode today?
I don't know really, but I guess one of the things that I didn't mention about, you know, the we are nature, that really kind of expressing your own body as well. You know, we're with nature all the time. We have our body, and our body is nature, and our who we're with our nature. You know, and also loads of research has shown that just having a potted plant in your room can also really help you with the benefits of nature. So there's just a tiny little thing. So something that brings you a sense of joy or beauty. Maybe it could be some flowers or a pot plant or something like that. Could also be your first tiny step in starting to enjoy nature more than human nature.
Thank you so very much. The last thing to ask everybody, if you've heard anything that you feel is useful for you, for your colleagues, friends, family, carers around you, please share this episode. Help us to help, and let's continue connecting. Let us know what is that you learn or found particularly useful as well from this episode. And Ness, thank you so very much. I think we will be also adding in the description of this episode all the links to your card, to the books and everything that we have spoken about here today, so people can also find more resources and more useful information after listening this episode. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Super. Thank you so much.